York. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Edgardo Miranda Rodriguez is here. Edgardo came on the program, about a year ago, maybe longer now?
Yeah, a year ago.
Yeah, and as you prepared to launch the world's first Puerto Rican-inspired comic book, La Borinqueña.
Yes, sir.
And it was, step up to closer to the mic. Let me get your level, make sure you're good, because I want people to hear this. This is a good talk we're about to have.
Probando,
There you go. And Puerto Rican Day Parade this weekend.
Next
weekend, excuse me. And a lot going on with the Puerto Rican Day Parade. So, we'll get into politics, too, because I want to have that talk. But this comic book is now done, and people can go get it.
Yeah, it's actually available in New York City at Forbidden Planet.
Okay.
And I'm actually
and that's a big comic book store. That's
that's
a big deal.
It's a huge store.
Is that the only place that's available and not online yet?
It's available online on our website on laborinqueña.somosarte.com. But in New York City and nationally, I've been doing a lot of events. I just came back from doing a signing in Philadelphia. In Philadelphia's first black woman, if not nationally, black woman-owned comic book shop called Amalgam Comics and Coffee House.
Wow.
And I've gone to New Orleans, Center for Contemporary Arts. I've gone to D.C. to speak at the Smithsonian. I've spoken at University of Washington in Seattle. So I've been on a national tour this last year, talking about the book, selling the book at signings, and doing my best to raise awareness about what's going on in Puerto Rico. And it's working out to be exactly what I envisioned it, in that the comic book is giving me the platform to really talk about social justice issues, and which is really what I wanted to do with the comic in the first place. The comic is kind of like its own entity, but when I'm actually able to come out like I'm here now and be able to talk more in depth about what is happening and stuff. And it's like, this year is like, I've been talking to a few people, and the best phrase I've heard from some people is like the perfect storm. It's like everything is like
everything
is like happening right now.
And okay, so before we get to that and attempt to to unpack it all, right? This La Borinqueña comic, you shot at the comic book store. You can follow at La Borinqueña Comics on social media and Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
Also, laborinqueña.somosarte.com.
Right.
And you can buy this online too?
Yep, you can buy that. We got T-shirts, posters, mugs, and an action figure that's coming out this month.
Okay, very dope. I'd love to figure out a way for us to maybe purchase some, maybe do some giveaways.
Oh, yeah, that would be dope.
Now, it is the perfect storm because, so much is happening in the Caribbean. So much is happening on the island of Puerto Rico and other islands. So much is happening in the world. So much is happening in America. There's a lot of things happening. But let's deal with the parade first.
Yes.
It's NAPL was the Puerto Rican nationalist organization that Oscar
FALN.
It was FALN.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me.
FALN.
That Oscar Lopez Rivera was a part of.
Mm-hmm.
Bombings took place in New York City and other cities in America. Oscar was charged with, transporting explosives.
Actually, he was charged with seditious conspiracy.
And conspiracy.
So he wasn't actually charged with anything directly related to any of the explosions, anything directly related to the violence. When he went to court, he didn't ask for a lawyer. He actually asked to be tried in a world court. He wanted to be tried as a political prisoner, rather than to be tried as an American citizen. And so he was convicted on seditious conspiracy. And then before President Obama finished his term, his presidency, he commuted, along with many other political prisoners. But he commuted Oscar's sentence. Now, commuted means he just shortened it. He wasn't pardoned for his crime, for his time. But his sentence originally was 55 years, so it was shortened to 35 years. And
now he's out. Yes.
And now he's out. He's officially out. He was kind of like on this quasi probation for a few months, and then he officially came out in May, and he's been visiting Puerto Rico, visiting Chicago, visiting he's been on a tour himself.
And seeing Puerto Rican people and just now, many people or corporations and people are not supporting him be a part of the Puerto Rican Day Parade.
Yeah, the parade has become, for the first time, a very political controversial entity. Now, in the past, it's been controversial for many other reasons, but this is the first time that it's actually being politicized because of a position they're taking and honoring a figure such as Oscar Lopez, who clearly stands for the independence of Puerto Rico. It kind of reminds me of like the 1980s when the St. Patrick's Parade was honoring Michael Flannery, who was a leader of the Irish Revolutionary Army. And many senators like Ted Kennedy and many others like pulled out of the parade because they didn't want to be involved in the parade. But the St. Patrick's Parade continued soon after that. And many people still believe that the Puerto Rican Day Parade will continue after this weekend.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how the mayor feels too. That's why he's not walking.
Well,
I mean, that's why he is walking.
He is walking,
Well,
He's
right.
walking, yes.
Let's focus on Puerto Rico. You have people who want the relationship with America to remain the same.
Yeah.
You have a large faction of people who want to renegotiate
Yeah.
the agreement.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a smaller percentage of
Very
people
small.
who want to be independent.
Yeah. It's interesting.
All of them, and the reason I say it that way is because they're all Puerto Ricans while they don't necessarily agree with what the approach for the island and the best business approach and cultural, or not cultural, but business approach, political approach for the island, all still Puerto Rican.
Yes.
Do you believe that is why the parade committee decided to honor him? Not because they necessarily agree with his political views or actions that he was associated with, but because he is still Puerto Rican.
I think fundamentally you're right. They're honoring him because he is Puerto Rican. They're also honoring him because up to a certain point, internationally, a lot of world leaders, not just Puerto Ricans, not just Americans, rallied around his release because they just felt as a man who was approaching 74 years of age, it was a human rights issue that he needed to be released and that he served enough time. And I think that what is happening in Puerto Rico right now, and interestingly enough, the exact weekend of the parade is the plebiscite. And for those who don't understand, plebiscite is actually when the island votes for what they want their status to be. Do they want to be a state? Do they want to be independent? Or do they want to remain where they are right now? Interestingly enough, it's a non-binding vote, which means that they get to, on the island, vote for what they would like, but there is no commitment upon the U.S. government to honor that at all. And that's actually a vote that's could cost the island around like $10 million to actually organize, which is really bizarre because they just closed 184 public schools, displacing about 27,000 students that are going to have to look for a new school.
Including the university, right? of Puerto
Yeah,
Rico?
and the University of Puerto Rico, the Promesa, the financial board, they're projecting a $512 million cut. And they're doing all these cuts, but they're still spending, and like what I was going to say with the public school, with the 184 schools closing, they're trying to save $7 million by doing that. But they're going to put $10 million to do this vote, which is much more of a statement than it is an actual act, than it is an actual policy that can be legislated or law that can be ratified.
So, and I want to focus on that, the fact that the island can take a vote and America doesn't have to honor what the people on the island say, hey, this is what we would like.
Yeah.
The relationship part, right? And, America's relationship with Mexico, America's relationship with many Caribbean islands is kind of, dare I say, a relationship where America bullies these islands in many ways. And these islands have to stay in line, right? And support what America wants from an economic standpoint, from a political standpoint, et cetera, or they're cut off.
Yeah,
which is basically what happened in Cuba.
Yes, it's basically what happened in Cuba. And
removing Fidel's psychosis and the way he went crazy,
Right.
removing that from the conversation, it originally started that it was like, no, we don't want to be your, we don't want your foot on our neck. We want to have our own identity and being able to negotiate our own deals.
And then the U.S. imposed an embargo, which up until
choked out the island.
Up until Obama's last term was trying to be for the first time renegotiated, talked about for the very first time, and now even Cuba is in the news because all the proposed work that was being presented by President Obama is pretty much being tossed aside, and now Cuba is in like this whole new kind of like not embargo, but it is really like weird space
flux.
again.
It's
completely in flux.
And it's going to be a few years of craziness until it gets figured out. The reason I want to focus on that is specifically because on the island of Puerto Rico, the relationship, as I understand it from Puerto Ricans, is one that was based on strategy, right? Military strategy,
Totally.
the location, the geographic location of the island.
Completely.
Right?
And you look at the number of army bases, military bases across the island that are U.S. military bases, and the fact that it's a U.S. territory, they can literally open up shop and not have to actually negotiate anything with the government or with anything.
Or pay the people or
Right.
do anything to use that geographic location. So that island, now focus here, you have an island that is struggling financially, that is saying we need help. America, in the relationship, currently, as I understand, has not sent any financial help because America has their own financial problems.
It's very clear under President Trump and Paul Ryan that they're not in any way, shape, or form going to allow Puerto Rico to bail out, ask for bankruptcy. Even though right now the governor of Puerto Rico last month proposed and moved towards bankruptcy. Because Promesa, which was put together by President Obama and the governor at the time, failed. They had a year to try to figure out how to renegotiate the
And Obama
debt
was,
crisis.
I remember that was the whole thing, and it never got figured out. Congress didn't
figure it out.
vote. It just stalled it out.
It's almost exactly what happened with Detroit. When they were trying to figure out, they had an independent board, and they were trying to figure out how to assess and manage the debt, and they also failed. So what's happening right now in
And it's
with Puerto
important that
Rico,
you say that because people got to understand that there are cities and states in the United States that have financial problems.
Yeah.
And the relationship with the government is such, it's not like
It's
they can just say, yo, we're not going to pay our bills. The government's like, either you guys figure out economically what you're going to do for business in your territory so that you can be beholden to paying the taxes and keeping the relationship alive, or it's going to be a struggle for your schools and local governments. It happens in America, and it's happening in Puerto Rico, which is America also.
Since you brought that up, that reminds me, if you look at what President Obama did on his administration, particularly for Detroit, particularly for the auto industry, he created a stimulus package. He put money into the auto industry. So not only did they help Detroit negotiate their debt, which in economic terms is referred to as austerity measures, how are we going to cut money to pay back this money? They created stimulus programs to actually boost the economy. And now the economy of Detroit is not there yet, but the auto industry is growing. I mean, I'm driving a Jeep, literally, that's made here in the United States, and it's a sign of that. But what's happening with Puerto Rico is lacking that. All they're doing is they're saying cut, and they're not thinking about anything to actually boost the economy.
Well, I think, and I keep staying here, and it's important because, once again, you have a situation where there's an economic issue. The island, the territory, the state, or whatever is saying, hey, we need some support.
Right.
America is not willing to renegotiate the deal, the old deal that's been in place since
100 years, literally. This is the 100th anniversary of that Jones-Shafrath Act. That's why I was originally saying this year, 2017, is literally the perfect storm. I mean, you couldn't have written this in a comic book this way. This is literally the 100th anniversary of an act that was signed 100 years ago that pretty much created the situation that Puerto Rico is in now. The bonds that were sold over the last 20 years that led to the $70+ billion debt plus the $49 billion in pension funds, that was a program that was created literally 100 years ago because these bonds that Puerto Rico was allowed to sell had a triple bonus attached to it, meaning that they didn't have state, local, or federal taxes attached to it. So you could buy these bonds without any penalties. And it was literally in the last 20 years that these bonds were being sold like crazy. And then they were resold as junk bonds. And that's where the mess that the island is now. And this year is literally this 100th anniversary of this.
And do now, in there are, I hear administrative redundancies on the island of Puerto Rico. Like people say some of the schools that were closed down were half empty, not being used. Some of them just didn't need to be open anymore. There are some that were just cut because financial issues. And then there are people, I read an article that was like, look, something like the state of California has, at the state level, has 500 people that work at the state. I forget what the number was. And Puerto Rico had like 800. And they were like, Puerto Rico is not the size of California, so why did they have so many people with state jobs?
Right.
So there are some mismanagement issues, right? But I think not being able to file bankruptcy, but not getting financial assistance, and being able to be used as a military, like,
Outpost.
outpost, and not receiving any benefit is the worst deal I've ever heard of.
Yeah. And I mean, there's also a lot of other stuff, like, because under the Jones-Shafferth Act, Puerto Rico is not allowed to deal directly with international commerce. They're not allowed to trade.
Right, I heard about that.
And I mean,
so they
literally,
can't strike
let's
a deal
break
with
this
any
down.
other country without America being in the middle. It has to come through Florida
it's basic.
for
Wow.
Puerto
Right.
Rico to get their any
The
imports.
basic explanation is something like this. If you're a Puerto Rican auto dealer and you want to buy Kia cars to sell on your lot, right? Those cars will ship from South Korea on a boat. They'll get to Florida. They'll take every single one of those cars off that boat and they'll load it on another boat. And that boat will take a few miles to get to Puerto Rico. And they'll charge Puerto Rico a tariff. And some people have actually estimated that over the last 100 years, that's probably cost Puerto Rico about over $80 billion in additional expenditures that they didn't necessarily need to have. And also another thing that people don't realize is that Puerto Rico is a very poor island. I mean, they are literally operating at 1/3 of what the lowest per capita income is here in the United States. And the amount of taxes, the last administration introduced about, I think, 90 new taxes. This administration, in just the first few months, introduced another 80 taxes. So they're imposing so many taxes on like only 40% of the population that actually pays the taxes. I mean, if you take the debt and you broke it down to the 3.5 million people that live on an island, you're literally expecting every person to pay about $34,000 to cover the debt. And the debt is, I mean, like, I'm glad that you brought it up, because the debt is also something that came from government mismanagement, a lot of corruption, a lot of payola, a lot of redundancy. But it's now the people, the poor people, that are facing the effects of this, with hospitals closing, with schools closings, with health insurance programs that are going to be significantly reduced. And what's also happening is people are referring to it as the brain drain. Have you ever heard of that phrase? Which means that all these professionals, they're leaving the island. All these signs. And so when the tax code changed in 2006 that forbade, that actually imposed taxes on these businesses that were on the island, mostly for the pharmaceutical industries, they left to Mexico and they left to Asia, right? So what did that do? That left a bunch of chemists, scientists, engineers, professionals without work. So they left. And a lot of them came to New York. A lot of them came to Philadelphia, Syracuse, New Jersey, to wherever the other pharmaceutical companies are. And they're already projecting that we're about 2.5 years from 2020, that by 2020, Florida is going to have about 1 million Puerto Ricans, and it's going to outnumber Cubans for the first time in the history of the United States.
Well, they all left New York, too.
They're all leaving. But they're mostly leaving the island right now. I mean, and it's not just like originally, like in the 1950s, when my family came to New York City from Puerto Rico, was when the petroleum industry collapsed. And that's what's crazy about working on my comic book. Actually, I've been learning more about history. And I was like, there was a petroleum industry in Puerto Rico? That's crazy. So when OPEC was created, it collapsed the petroleum industry. And thus, 250,000 Puerto Ricans came in the 1950s. But since around 2007, when this tax code changed, you've seen about 450,000 Puerto Ricans that are moving. And that's also something for people to understand, because Puerto Ricans moving from Puerto Rico to the United States, it's like us moving from here to like Pennsylvania or to Texas, because they're American citizens. So they actually can. They're not illegal. Although when we did come here in the 50s and when we continue to come here, we're treated as second-class citizens because we're people of color, and that's something that people are constantly facing. And so Puerto Ricans are going all over the United States. Because of my comic book, I've toured Seattle, Los Angeles, New Orleans, and I'm finding new pockets of Puerto Ricans everywhere. I was in Los Angeles last winter, and I saw a pocket of Puerto Ricans, young Puerto Ricans in their 20s, millennials. They were just a few months. They were like, we were looking for new places to live. We heard LA is a dope scene because it's nice and warm. And they were doing their folkloric music, creating their own arts and stuff like that. And it's dope to see that they're still attached to their culture. But what it is, that's sad is that they're leaving the island because there's no opportunities for them.
Right.
There's no work for them, And it's like where I'm at right now, as someone making this comic book, is I'm trying to raise awareness, and I'm also trying to save money because I want to buy property on the island. Because wherever the island falls, whether it becomes a state, independent, continues to be a territory, the only thing that can save Puerto Rico is if people like us living here in the U.S., particularly those of us of Puerto Rican heritage, buy property because it's so inexpensive. Oh my gosh, it's so inexpensive. Even like parts of San Juan, which is like buying something in Tribeca, you can get a 2-bedroom condo for like $300,000 to $500,000, which is bananas. And if you move a little further out, you can buy something for around a full house with like 3 or 4 bedrooms for like $100,000. It's just
on
like
the beach.
And literally, no, I'm serious.
No,
it sounds
I
funny,
know
but
people who have
literally.
houses there on the beach.
And get a mortgage with like anywhere from $10,000 to $1,000 down, paying a couple of $100 a month on mortgage. I mean, literally, how many people have phone bills that are a couple of $100? Can you imagine that being your mortgage and you actually have an actual vacation home? And I think that's kind of like the move, because it's like, what are the solutions? Here's Puerto Rico in this mess. And what I'm trying to do in my small way is I employ artists to actually live on the island. I try to bring attention to get people to actually come to the island to help boost the economy. And I think that's really the thing here. And it's just like, it's just an incredibly crazy moment, because the parade is coming up in a couple of weeks. The plebiscite vote is actually coming up the same weekend as the parade. Oscar Lopez is on a national tour. This is the 100th anniversary of the Jones Act. Daddy Yankee and Luis Fonsi got Despacito.
#1 record.
Number one.
Yeah.
It's like from pop music to politics. It's like Puerto Rico is like on everybody's lips.
It's bittersweet too. It's so bittersweet.
It is.
Right?
It is so bittersweet. But I think the dopest thing about the controversy is that people are talking about it. So it doesn't matter where you stand on the issues, the fact that people are talking about it. And I'm glad that we're talking about it, because for the most part, anything directly involving the economy, and I read about it, it's only in like Forbes or in Bloomberg News or in Wall Street Journal, like these kind of media outlets, which really reach the masses. Your show reaches the masses. These are the shows that really need to talk about it, so that people can not only become aware, obviously, of pop music and local politics, but also be aware of what's actually happening in the world or in their backyard, literally. Because Puerto Rico is literally like the U.S.'s backyard.
How sensitive is the conversation around Puerto Rican independence versus statehood versus remaining Commonwealth? How sensitive?
Incredibly sensitive. So sensitive because the majority of people on the island don't vote for independence. And that's a bitter pill for many people to swallow who believe in independence.
So let's stop right there and let's just unpack that for a second. What is the benefit of the relationship of as it stands today for Puerto Rico?
The main overwhelming benefit that Puerto Ricans have is really for individual Puerto Ricans, and that they have their American citizenship, and they have the freedom to literally go back and forth.
Do what they got to do.
Yeah, they can come here, they can save some money, and they
as
can
you
go back.
articulated a second ago, finding jobs, finding work, just moving around has its benefits, right?
Yeah. And if Puerto Rico were to be independent, first of all, they would literally need to have the infrastructure that would allow for autonomy, but then they would be able to negotiate with countries internationally on their own terms, renegotiate in terms of like what kind of commerce they could boost up to really like give the economy the boost that it needs to survive, But the thing is that you're looking at Puerto Ricans on the island that for hundreds of years have identified themselves in this kind of like ambiguous state of being an American citizen. So they don't see anything beyond that.
Well, and okay, so
the other thing is
the independence
right now. The
thing
independence thing is interesting because from what I've done, and I go to Puerto Rico, like literally I go to the island a lot, and I'm obviously living here in New York, and I've been going nationally. The independence thing is something that usually is discussed mostly with Puerto Ricans who live here in the United States. Now, I'm not saying that there isn't an independence movement in Puerto Rico. There is. There's a very strong independence movement in Puerto Rico, especially now with a lot of these college students that have been protesting because of the $512 million they want to cut from the university. A lot of those students do strongly believe in independence. But those of us that are here in the United States that have our opinions, whether we want statehood or whether we want independence, we don't vote on the island.
The thing, all I was going to say about independence, if you look internationally, well, you got to look at your size in the total picture of what's going on the globe. You have huge countries, independent countries, that struggle financially because when you don't have, the right relationships to buy and sell goods and create jobs and attract companies and do these things, as you talked about infrastructure, your island's going to struggle even worse.
Yeah.
Right? Or your country. I mean, look, we're at a time right now, we're looking at African countries, right?
Yes.
And some Caribbean countries, Jamaica and other countries that are now approaching like 60 and 70 years of independence that are just now finding their footing.
Right.
And when I say just now, it's still a lot of times in shambles.
Right. Well, that's why some people are asking, and again, this is like, I'm not an economist. I'm not a politician. I make comic books, but I've been able to talk to so many interesting people, and I have to keep myself open, and I have to be open to everybody and what their views are. And some people they're not loud enough, but there are some people that are saying we need to renegotiate what we already have, because
I've heard that the loudest.
And then people are saying, let's look at what the word Commonwealth even means. I mean, Canada is a Commonwealth. They have the autonomy to trade with anybody, yet they still maintain relationships with a lot of the European countries, So some people are saying, well, what if Puerto Rico could become a Commonwealth in the truest form, and that it actually can maintain a relationship with the United States, but drop the Jones-Shafroth Act that it doesn't allow them to do trade, or rather that they're imposed this tariff, and give them a lot more autonomy to be much more of a traditional Commonwealth. That's why a lot of people on the island for many years have been voting for Commonwealth. It was actually in the most recent plebiscite that people finally started voting for statehood. But
and what's the difference in Commonwealth and statehood?
Well, Commonwealth is kind of like what exists now in a way, but it's much more
but
like...
that tariff ruins everything.
The tariff oh my God, it ruins beyond everything. And it also allows for a lot more respect and a lot more autonomy. But the thing is that the plebiscite and the way it's situated, the current governor is really pushing on the island, like if we become a state, we're straight. They're gonna have to give us the bankruptcy, because every state in the United States is allowed to file Chapter 11, file to be bankrupt to clear out his debt. He's saying we'll get even more resources on the island. But the reality is that this administration doesn't care.
Well, and I'll take it a step further. I'm gonna take it a step further. Who that represents Puerto Rico benefits from things remaining the same? And who is benefiting from it not being dealt with? Someone is benefiting.
The United States
somebody
government,
very wealthy and powerful benefiting.
The United States government benefits if Puerto Rico remains the territory that it is. All of these hedge funds, all of these banks, all of these corporations that own Puerto Rican debt, they benefit if Puerto Rico remains a territory of the United States.
Because basically they own stock. In simple terms, they own stock in the country.
They do.
And as it tanks, then they can build it back up.
Right. And right now the debt is in court in the New York State. In New York State, there's a U.S. District Court judge that's actually overseeing this right now. So it's literally in court right now to negotiate the terms of the bankruptcy, to negotiate the terms. And even the governor in his latest business proposal said that I can give $800 million towards the debt. And, the people who own the debt are like, that's not what we need. We need, billions of dollars, So it's just a terrible position that the economy is in. It's a terrible position that it is. And it's just like, again, it's just this incredible like storm where everything is just like happening all at the same time.
Do you know, I would love to have, and if somebody's watching this, somebody from the business world that maybe negotiates businesses or business coming to Puerto Rico, but it sounds very similar to, debt on the stock market, right?
Yeah.
Where you have publicly traded companies that aren't, able to make as much money anymore. Their stocks begin to fall because the shareholders, are not seeing the return on their investment. And then a company wants to go private, and people who own the stocks are like, I bought the stock at $20.
But the thing
You're
is,
not going to give me $5. You got to do better than that. I'm sitting on this until you figure out a way to give me more than what you're saying you're going to give me to go private.
But the thing about Puerto Rico is that unlike a company, you can measure a company based on the products, based on the services. Well, then let's just sell the products at a higher price. Let's just make more products and try to recoup more money. Puerto Rico doesn't create enough goods and enough services to actually recoup that money. In fact, the gross domestic product of the island by 2018, according to the debt, is going to exceed 107%, meaning the debt is going to oversee what the island can actually produce.
Yeah.
And what I was saying before is like all of these austerity measures or all these proposals to cut are not introducing anything to actually boost the actual economy. Like, okay, we know we owe you money, but what are you proposing that the island do to actually boost economy, to make money, to pay, not only pay the debt, but to actually
get jobs,
and get industry.
Industry.
And not just tourist industry, but all the other types of industry on the island. Will Google open up a shop there? Will Amazon open up a shop? Like, in other words, can we bring technology to the island so that people can actually retain their jobs and retain their homes?
Wow, great talk. A lot to deal with.
Sad, man.
It definitely sucks. But La Borinqueña, this is the first installment. Yeah.
Yes.
And how often are these going to come out?
The next issue is going to come out later this year. I'm actually revealing the cover art to the second issue next week. I'm working with the Taps crew, legendary graffiti kings, and we're doing a mural that's going to be painted on Casita Maria, which is an art center in the South Bronx. And on Wednesday of next week, June 7th, we're going to unveil the mural. So I'm super excited about that because the mural contains artwork by legendary comic icon George Perez, who has been in the comic book industry since the 70s. He's created like over 60 superheroes, from like the new Teen Titans, like Starfire, Cyborg, to even villains like Deathstroke. Created Marvel's first Puerto Rican hero, the White Tiger. And I got him to do the cover of the next book, and that's going to be part of the mural that the Task Crew is going to do. And then after the show today, I'm going to be at Forbidden Planet for a little bit, signing copies of La Borinqueña, the first issue. And hopefully, these conversations continue. And the character herself, I wrote the character intentionally to be a college student, because one of the things I've learned about writing, particularly from that perspective, is like when you're a young person and you leave your home for the first time, that's really when you find yourself. Most of us, when we leave home, we're not already shaped in terms of what our political ideology is, what our beliefs are, what do we stand for. It isn't until we kind of like go away from home that we finally find ourselves and find out who we are in the world. And for everything that's happening in Puerto Rico, wherever you stand politically, I felt that for a book, it was important to create a character that was seeing the world for the first time. And as a science student, she's kind of very focused on her studies, but when she's in Puerto Rico and she's realizing that schools are closing or that the environment is being affected, it can't help but spark her conscience to wake up and be like, why are these things happening? This wouldn't happen anywhere else in the United States. Why is it okay for it to happen here in Puerto Rico? And the book is offering me that vehicle to actually do that. And at the same time, allowing me the opportunity to introduce a woman of color as a superhero, because all of us love superhero culture, but as people of color, we don't see ourselves. Even though we love these movies and we see the universality in the narratives and we're like, yeah, I can see myself as Tony Stark. But reality is, the only thing we could do with Tony Stark is give ourselves a goatee like him, because he's not Puerto Rican or he's not black like us. You see what I'm saying? And with this character, for the first time, people like, and then not just Puerto Ricans, all Latinos, all women of color, all people of color going, oh my God, she's black. She looks like us and stuff. And that's also a reminder to show people the diversity of what it is to be Latin. And more oftentimes in mainstream media, Latins are portrayed mostly as light-skinned. And the reality is that we're an ethnic group comprised of all races: Asian, African, European, Taino, Native American, right? And it's beautiful to showcase that. And to have a hero that's actually a black Puerto Rican, for me, is necessary, particularly in this day and age.
There it is, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Always great to see you. And anything and any information you get, Edgardo, that you could share with us and we could continue to put out for the people, we thank.
Of course, man.
Blessing, man. Thank you.
You're welcome, brother.